I remember that night like it was etched into the back of my eyelids, replaying every time I closed them. It was late fall, the kind where the leaves had mostly fallen, leaving the trees skeletal against the darkening sky. I just finished a double shift at the old lumber mill up near Harlan, Kentucky. The work was backbreaking, sawdust clinging to my clothes and skin, but it paid the bills, kept the roof over my head in that little clapboard house I'd inherited from my pa. He used to warn me about these mountains, saying they had a way of swallowing folks whole if you weren't careful. But I was 32, hardened by life, and figured those were just old-timer tales to keep kids from wandering off. That evening, I climbed in my beat-up Ford pickup, the engine coughing to life with a reluctant rumble. The dashboard clock glowed 11:47 p.m. Home was about an hour away, down those twisting roads that snaked through the Appalachians like veins in an ancient beast. I didn't mind the drive usually. It gave me time to think, to let the day's aches fade into the hum of the tires. The air was crisp as I pulled out of the mill lot, headlights piercing the gathering dusk. I cracked the window a bit, letting in the scent of pine and damp earth. The radio was tuned to some staticky country station, playing Johnny Cash low and mournful, his voice crackling like it was coming from another world. As I hit the main road, well, what passes for Maine in these parts? Just a Tulane blacktop hugged by dense forest, the fog started rolling in. It came slow at first, wisps curling over the asphalt like smoke from a dying fire. By the time I was 10 miles out, it was thick, a living blanket that swallowed everything beyond 20 feet. My high beams bounced back at me, turning the world into a hazy glow. I slowed down, gripping the wheel tighter, the truck's suspension creaking over potholes. These roads weren't made for speed. One wrong turn, and you'd be tumbling down a ravine, lost to the underbrush. I'd heard the stories, of course. Everyone in these hills has. Whispers around the bar after shift, or from the old folks at the general store. Tales of people who'd gone missing years back, miners, loggers, even whole families during the hard times, and never come out the same. They called them the wild ones or ferals, folks who'd snapped under the weight of isolation, poverty, maybe something darker in the water or the air, living like animals up in the hollows, scavenging, avoiding civilization. Pa used to say it was the mountains themselves that did it, twisting a man's mind until he forgot how to be human. I'd laugh it off, call it superstition. Deer accidents or bear sightings blown out of proportion. That's what I told myself. But driving alone that night, with the fog pressing in, those stories started niggling at the back of my mind. What if there was truth to them? What if something was watching from the trees? The incline started about halfway home, the road climbing toward Pine Ridge. My truck sputtered a little, the engine straining against the grade. I downshifted, the transmission grinding in protest. That's when I first noticed it, the eyes. Just a glint at the edge of the tree lean, low to the ground, reflecting my headlights like cat's eyes on a dark porch. I blinked, figuring it for a deer or maybe a coyote. They were common enough out here. But the eyes didn't move, didn't bound away like an animal would. They just stared, unblinking, steady as a predator sizing up prey. I kept driving, but my skin prickled, that old instinct kicking in. The radio hissed louder then, static swallowing Johnny's drawl, popping and crackling like bones breaking. I fiddled with the dial, but it didn't help. The signal was gone, lost in the mountain's shadow. More eyes appeared as I crested the hill. 2 pairs now, then 3, dotting the underbrush on both sides of the road. They shifted slightly, tracking my progress, but stayed hidden in the fog-shrouded trees. My heart picked up a notch, thumping against my ribs. Just wildlife, I muttered to myself, voice sounding small in the cab. But deep down, I knew it wasn't right. Deer eyes were higher off the ground, and they scattered at the sound of an engine. These were patient, watchful. I pressed the gas a little harder, the truck lurching forward. The road twisted sharply ahead, a hairpin turn I knew well, but in the fog, it felt treacherous, like the mountain was trying to shake me off. That's when the first thud came. Heavy, deliberate, against the passenger door. The truck rocked slightly, metal groaning. I jerked my head over, but the window was fog from the inside, smeared with condensation. Something scratched then, slow, rasping, like nails on a chalkboard. My blood ran cold. I wiped the glass with my sleeve, peering out. There, pressed against the door, was a hand. Filthy, caked with dirt and what looked like dried blood, nails long and jagged like claws. Beyond it, a figure, human-shaped but wrong, all hunched over, shoulders sloping like it had forgotten how to stand straight. Matted hair hung in tangles, framing a face pale and gaunt, eyes wild and empty. No spark of recognition, just a raw, animal hunger. It pawed at the window again, smearing grime, mouth opening in a silent snarl that showed yellowed teeth. Panic surged through me like ice water. I floored the accelerator, tires spinning for a second before catching. The truck shot forward, but the road curved hard left, and I had to slam the brakes to avoid plunging over the edge. The drop-off was steep there, a black void swallowed by fog. As I corrected, another shape leaped from the shadows right onto the hood. The impact shook the whole vehicle, dents popping under the weight. It was another one, similar to the first. Ragged clothes hanging off a skeletal frame, fists pounding the metal like hammers on an anvil. The sound was deafening, rhythmic, almost like a signal. Growls filtered through the glass. Not animal, but something broken, human voices twisted into primal rage. Words? Maybe once, but now just guttural noises that raised the hairs on my neck. I swerved wildly, tried to shake it off. The thing on the hood slid but held on, claws, nails, digging into the paint with a screech. More thuds now from the sides and back. They were swarming, these feral things, circling the truck like a pack of wolves around a wounded elk. One banged on the driver's window, face so close I could see the scars crisscrossing its skin, eyes locked on mine with that empty stare. It reached through a tiny crack I'd left open earlier, fingers brushing my arm. I yelped, pain shooting up as nails raked my skin, drawing blood. Warm trickles down my sleeve, soaking into my shirt. The smell hit me then, unwashed bodies rot, the wild tang of the forest floor. It was inside the cab now, faint but overpowering. The road straightened for a stretch, and I pushed the truck to its limit, engine roaring. The one on the hood tumbled off with a heavy thump, rolling into the ditch. But others kept pace, loping alongside on all fours, faster than any person should be. Their movements were fluid, adapted to the terrain, like they'd been born to it. I glimpsed more in the rear view. Shadowy forms darting between trees, eyes flashing in the taillights. The radio static peaked, a white noise that drowned out my ragged breathing. Was this real? Or had the exhaustion from the mill finally cracked me? No, the pain in my arm was real, the dents in the door were real. These weren't ghosts or legends. They were people, or what was left of them after the mountains had chewed them up. I rounded another bend, the fog thinning slightly as I descended toward the valley. A clearing ahead, lights twinkling from a small cluster of houses, the outskirts of Pineville. The attackers seemed to sense it, their assaults growing frantic. One last leap onto the bed of the truck, rocking it violently. I heard would splinter, maybe a branch they carried as a weapon. I zigzagged, hearing a body hit the pavement with a sickening crunch. Then, as suddenly as it started, they peeled away, melting back into the tree line like shadows fleeing the dawn. The fog lifted fully as I rolled into town, tires humming on smoother asphalt. My hand shook on the wheel, knuckles white. The truck was a mess. Dents like fist prints, scratches gouging the paint, windows spiderwebbed with cracks. Blood stained my sleeve, shallow but stinging cuts that would scar. I pulled up to the sheriff's office, a squat brick building with a single light on. Stumbled inside, the bell jingling like a mockery. Sheriff Harlan, same last name as the town, family ties ran deep here. Looked up from his desk, coffee mug in hand. He was an old-timer, face weathered like the hills. I spilled it all, words tumbling out in a rush. The eyes, the hands, the attacks. He listened, nodding slowly, no surprise in his eyes. When I finished, he set down his mug, sighed. Son, these mountains, they don't give up their secrets easy. Folks go missing, come back changed. Or don't come back at all. We've had reports like yours before. Drifters, maybe, or kin from the old clans up in the hollows. They stay wild, avoid the law. Best you forget it, stick to daylight drives. Forget it? How could I? He patched up my arm with a first aid kit, sent me home with a warning to lock my doors. But as I drove the last few miles, the quiet pressed in again. No eyes in the trees now, but I felt them, watching, waiting. That night, sleep didn't come easy. Every creak of the house, every rustle outside, and me bolting upright, heart pounding. The scratches on my arm healed slow, itching like a reminder. I quit the late shifts at the mill, found work closer to town. But even now, years later, I avoid those roads after dark. The fog rolls in sometimes, and I wonder, are they still out there? Those feral souls, haunting the mountains, hungry for the next wanderer who strays too far? Or worse, was it just a glimpse of what these hills can do to any of us if we let the isolation sink in too deep? I don't know. And that's the part that keeps me up at night, staring into the darkness, listening for the scratch at the door. I've lived in these Appalachian hills my whole life, born and raised in a little town called Elkford, tucked away in the folds of West Virginia, where the mountains rise like ancient guardians, silent and unyielding. My name's Elias, and back then, I was 28, working as a mechanic at the only garage in town. Fixed up trucks and tractors for folks who scratched out a living from the land, same as my family had for generations. Grandpa was the one who filled my head with stories when I was a kid, sitting on the porch of our old cabin, pipe smoke curling into the twilight. He'd talk about the lost ones, people who'd wandered off into the woods decades ago, maybe during the mine collapses in the 30s or the floods that wiped out whole hollows, and never came back. They didn't die, he'd say. They adapted, turned savage, living off roots and whatever they could hunt or steal. They ain't people no more, boy. He'd whisper, his eyes distant like he was seeing them right there in the shadows. The mountains change him, make him forget words and warmth. You hear whispers in the wind-up and hollow pass? That's them calling to each other. I'd shiver, but as I got older, I chalked it up to old man's tales, meant to keep me from straying too far. Folklore, nothing more. Life was hard enough without believing in ghosts of the living. That night, though, everything changed. It was mid-October, the air turning sharp with the promise of winter. I'd stayed late at the garage, wrestling with a busted transmission on old man Harlan's Chevy. By the time I locked up, it was pushing midnight. The sky was heavy, clouds gathering like they were plotting something, and the first rumbles of thunder echoed off the ridges. I climbed into my '98 Jeep Cherokee, the one I'd pieced together from salvage parts over the years. It wasn't pretty, dents from gravel roads, faded green paint, but it was reliable, or so I thought. Home was about 40 minutes away if I took the main highway, but with the storm brewing, I figured the shortcut through Hollow Pass would shave off time. It was an old logging road, unpaved in spots, winding through the densest part of the forest where cell service dropped to nothing and the trees pressed in like they were trying to reclaim the path. Folks avoided it after dark, but I'd driven it 100 times. What'd go wrong? As I turned off the blacktop onto the dirt track, the rain started. Just a light patter at first, tapping on the roof like impatient fingers. The wipers swished lazily, smearing the droplets across the windshield. The headlights cut narrow beams through the gloom, illuminating twisted branches overhanging the road like skeletal arms. The Jeep bounced over ruts, mud splashing up the sides. I cracked the window a hair to let in some fresh air, but it carried that earthy scent of wet soil and decaying leaves, thick and cloying. Grandpa's stories flickered in my mind, unbidden. The lost ones, their whispers. I shook it off, turned up the radio to drown out the silence. Some static-laced AM station playing bluegrass, the banjo picking fast and frantic, almost mocking the slow creep of the storm. The pass deepened, the road narrowing as it climbed into the hollow. Walls of rock and tree rose on either side, funneling the wind into eerie moans that whistled through the gaps. Rain picked up, turning the dirt to slick mud, and I had to ease off the gas to keep from sliding. No other cars out here, why would there be? This was the back way, forgotten except by locals like me. I glanced at the dashboard clock, 12:15 a.m. Thunder growled, closer now, lightning flickering distant, lighting up the canopy in stark white flashes. In one of those bursts, I thought I saw something, a shadow, flitting across the road ahead, gone before I could focus. Probably a deer, I told myself. They were thick in these woods, bounding out without warning. But my grip tightened on the wheel anyway, a prickle of unease settling in my gut. Then it happened again. Headlights caught a glimpse of movement, sharper this time. A figure darting from one side of the road to the other, upright, but too quick, too low-slung for a normal person. My foot hovered over the brake. A hiker? Out here, in this weather? Maybe someone's car broke down further up. I slowed the Jeep to a crawl, tires squelching in the muck. Rolled down the window a bit more, rain spattering my arm as I leaned out. "Hey, you need help." My voice echoed off the trees, swallowed by the downpour. No answer, just the steady drum of rain and the distant thunder. I strained to listen, but there was something else, a rustle in the bushes, faint like feet shifting on wet leaves. Then the smell hit me. It wafted in through the open window, overpowering the fresh rain scent. Rotting leaves, yes, but mixed with something musky, unwashed like sweat and filth left to fester. It made my stomach turn, that primal odor of neglect and wildness. I'd smelled dead animals on the roadside before, but this was different, alive, human, but wrong. Before I could process it, a rock whizzed out from the bushes, slamming into the side mirror with a crack. Glass shattered, shards tinkling onto the road. I jerked back, heart slamming in my chest. What the hell? Another rock followed, thumping against the door panel. Then more, pelting the Jeep from both sides like hail from hell. One glanced off the roof, denting the metal with a hollow boom. Panic flared, kids? Vandals? But out here? I hit the gas, but the tires spun uselessly in the mud, the Jeep fishtailing as I fought for traction. Shapes emerged from the trees then, materializing out of the rain-soaked darkness. Emaciated bodies, clad in rags that hung like sodden skins, faces pale and twisted under matted hair. They moved with a feral grace, hunched but deliberate, eyes catching the headlights in a glow that wasn't quite animal, wasn't quite human. Rage or desperation etched their features. Sunken cheeks, wild beards, lips pulled back in snarls that showed rotting teeth. One lunged at the passenger door, hands filthy, nails long and broken, yanking the handle with surprising strength. The door rattled but held locked. Its nails dug into the paint, scraping down with a screech that cut through the rain. I could see its face up close now, pressed against the glass. Eyes wide and feverish, holding a calculated intelligence, like it was assessing how to break in. Not mindless rage, but purpose. Hunger, maybe, or territorial fury. I revved the engine, the Jeep lurching forward as the tires finally bit. But another one scrambled onto the trunk, the vehicle dipping under the weight. It banged rhythmically, thump, 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 like a signal calling others. More shapes converged, hands slapping the windows, rocks cracking against the hood. The road narrowed ahead, branches scraping the roof like claws, and I felt the Jeep tilt sideways, as if they were pushing from the left, trying to force me off into the ditch. My mind raced, Grandpa's whispers echoing louder than the storm. The lost ones. Were these them? Survivors turned savage, claiming the hollow as their domain. Lightning flashed, illuminating the scene in stark relief. 5, maybe 6 of them, swarming like a pack. One climbed the hood, fists pounding the windshield, cracks spiderwebbing across the glass. Its growl filtered through low, guttural, almost words but twisted into something primal. I swerved, trying to shake them off, the Jeep sliding perilously close to the edge where the ground dropped away into blackness. Rain poured in through the cracked mirror side, soaking my shirt, mixing with the sweat of fear. The smell was everywhere now, choking, a reminder that these were people once, reduced to this by whatever curse the mountains held. I downshifted, flooring it again, mud flying in arcs. The one on the trunk tumbled off with a thud, rolling into the underbrush. Others fell back, but one clung to the door, fingers prying at the window's seal. I elbowed the glass, shouting incoherently, but it only snarled louder. The road began to level out, the hollow opening toward the highway. Thunder crashed overhead, drowning out their noises. Finally, traction held, and I pulled away, the Jeep accelerating onto firmer ground. The pounding stopped as suddenly as it began, the shapes receding in the rearview mirror, melting back into the trees like they'd never been. Rain washed the blood, mine, theirs, from where nails had scratched the paint, leaving gouges like scars. I burst onto the highway, tires humming on asphalt, the storm raging behind me. Pulled over at the first gas station, hands trembling as I killed the engine. The Jeep was battered, dents like footprints, mirror dangling by wires, windshield a maze of cracks. I stumbled inside, told the clerk, a grizzled old-timer. What happened? He just nodded, poured me coffee. Hollow pass? Yeah, heard tell of strange folks up there. Best not to stop. I drove to the sheriff's office next, reported it all. Sheriff Davies listened, scribbling notes, but then leaned back with a chuckle. Kids, probably. Teenagers messing around in the rain. We'll check it out. But his eyes didn't laugh. They held that knowing look like Grandpa's. Kids? Those weren't kids. Too gaunt, too feral, too real. That was 5 years ago, but the dread never left. I moved out of Elkford eventually, took a job in the city where lights chase away the shadows. But every night drive, even on busy interstates, brings it back. The patter of rain, the musky smell, the whispers I swear I hear in the wind. Were they the lost ones, guarding their forgotten world, or just desperate souls the mountains broke? I don't know, and the not knowing gnaws at me. A quiet sorrow for what they were, what I almost became in that hollow. The Appalachians keep their secrets, and sometimes in the dark, I wonder if they're still whispering my name, waiting for me to come back. I'd always consider myself a rational woman, the kind who didn't buy into the old wives' tales that floated around family gatherings like wood smoke from a dying fire. My name's Clara, and I grew up in the flatlands of Ohio, but my roots tangled back into West Virginia's Appalachians through my mother's side. Every few months, I'd make the drive down to visit Aunt Lydia in her weathered farmhouse near Beckley, where the hills rolled on forever, hiding hollows that time seemed to forget. She was getting on in years, her stories growing longer and more meandering, filled with warnings about the mountain folk, recluses who'd holed up after the coal mines shuttered in the 80s, families that turned inward, shunning the world until they became something less than civilized. They prey on strangers, Clara, she'd say, her voice dropping low over cups of weak coffee. Especially at night, when the fog rolls in. Best stick to the interstates. I'd nod politely, chalking it up to loneliness amplifying her fears. After all, I was 41, a schoolteacher with a sensible sedan and a GPS that promised safe routes. What did I have to fear from ghost stories? That trip, though, was different. It was early November, the leaves stripped bare, leaving the trees like jagged fingers scratching at the sky. I'd stayed later than usual at Aunt Lydia's, helping her sort through boxes of old photos, faded images of miners with soot-blackened faces, reminders of the hard lives that built these communities. By the time I hugged her goodbye, the sun had dipped below the ridges, painting the horizon in bruised purples. "Drive careful now," she called from the porch, her shawl pulled tight. "Fog's coming in thick tonight." I waved it off, climbed into my Honda Civic, and set the GPS for home. The route took me through the foggy peaks of the New River Gorge area, a stretch of winding two-lane roads that locals called the Backway. It was shorter, quieter, away from the truck traffic on I-77. The clock read 11:15 p.m. as I pulled onto the asphalt, headlights carving tunnels through the gathering mist. The radio hummed softly, some late-night talk show droning about weather patterns, but the signal faded quickly, leaving static that buzzed like distant insects. The quiet settled in gradual, like dust in an empty room. At first, it was peaceful, the kind of solitude that lets your mind wander. I thought about the photos we'd looked at, those stern faces staring back from another era, men who descended into the earth's belly and sometimes never came up. The road climbed steadily, the Civic's engine whining on the inclines. Fog thickened, swirling in eddies caught by my high beams, turning the world into a soft, opaque veil. Trees loomed closer on either side, their branches arching overhead like a natural tunnel. No other cars passed. It was just me, the hum of tires on damp pavement, and the occasional flicker of eye shine from a deer at the roadside. But as the minutes ticked by, the quiet turned oppressive, heavy, like the air before a storm. My shoulders tensed without reason, and I found myself glancing at the rearview mirror more often, seeing only the red glow of taillights fading into nothing. Aunt Lydia's warnings echoed faintly. Mountain folk, gone feral, preying on passers-by. Silly, I told myself. Just stories to scare outsiders like me. The first sign something was off came around midnight, as the road peaked near an overlook I'd passed before in daylight. A branch cracked loudly nearby, sharp, deliberate, like something heavy stepping wrong in the underbrush. I straightened in my seat, peering into the fog-shrouded trees. Probably an animal, a bear or elk stumbling through. But the rustle followed, large and uneven, paralleling the car from the right side. My foot eased off the gas instinctively, speed dropping to 30. The Civic's interior light felt too bright suddenly, exposing me while the outside remained hidden. I clicked it off, plunging the cab into shadow save for the dashboard glow. The rustling grew bolder, closer, and then I heard it, footsteps. Not the patter of paws, but pounding, rhythmic, keeping pace with the car. Unnaturally steady, like bare feet slapping wet earth. My heart stuttered, a cold prickle crawling up my spine. I accelerated gently, but the sounds matched me, drawing nearer. Peering out the passenger window, I caught silhouettes in the mist, human but deformed, limbs elongated and awkward, as if shaped by years of crawling through tight caves or scrambling over rocks. They moved low to the ground, hunched, their forms blurred but unmistakably bipedal. One broke from the pack, leaping toward the window with startling agility. Its face pressed close to the glass, breath fogging it in hot bursts, teeth bared in a silent snarl that revealed gaps and rot. The eyes, God, those eyes, were void of any warmth, just hollow malice, like a starved dog eyeing a bone. I veered left sharply, the car fishtailing on the slick road. But it grabbed the side mirror, fingers, claws, really with nails thick and curled, twisting the metal with a screech that tore through the night. The mirror dangled, wires sparking briefly before going dark. More joined then, emerging from the fog like ghosts materializing. Silhouettes multiplied, 4, 5, maybe more, hurling stones that clanged against the hood, denting it with dull thuds. One rock starred the windshield, a crack blooming like frost. Their grunts echoed now, low and guttural, not words but coordinated signals, like a pack communicating mid-hunt. "Go away," I shouted, voice cracking, but it only seemed to spur them. The road curved dangerously ahead, a sharp bend hugging a steep drop-off. I felt the car shudder as one clung to the rear bumper, its weight dragging like dead ballast, slowing me down. Tires spun for traction, the engine revving high. Claws raked the paint, long, scraping gouges that screamed metal on metal. The smell seeped in through the vents somehow, musk of unwashed skin, dirt, and something metallic like blood. Panic clawed at my chest. These weren't animals, but people, twisted by hardship, isolation, the relentless grind of the mountains. Recluses who'd forgotten society or been forgotten by it, now claiming the night as their territory. I downshifted desperately, flooring the pedal. The Civic surged, dislodging the hanger-on with a heavy thump and a pained grunt that faded behind. But others kept pace, loping alongside, their breaths ragged and close. One pounded the driver's door, rocking the car, its face inches from mine through the glass, scarred skin stretched tight over bones, hair matted with leaves and mud. No plea for help, just that feral intelligence, calculating how to stop me. The curve loomed. I braked hard, tires skidding, the drop-off yawning black to my right. A stone shattered the taillight, glass tinkling. I corrected, accelerating out of the turn, the road beginning to descend. Lights flickered ahead, a lit stretch near a gas station, the first sign of civilization in miles. The attackers sensed it, their efforts frantic now. One last leap onto the trunk that buckled the lid. I swerved, hearing a body slide off, tumbling into the ditch. As I emerged from the fog onto the brighter pavement, They retreated, melting back into the woods without a sound. The gas station's neon buzzed like a beacon. The attendant, a wiry man in overalls, glancing up from his stool as I pulled in, shaking. The Civic was wrecked, hood pocked with dents, paint scored deep, mirror hanging limp. I stumbled inside, spilling the story in gasps. He listened, chewing tobacco slowly, then muttered, "Them wild ones. Happens sometimes up in the peaks. Mine's closed, folks got left behind. Turn mean. No surprise, no call to the cops, just a knowing nod and a rag to wipe my hands. Get that fixed for you head out," he added, eyes flicking to the darkness beyond the pumps. I drove home that night in a daze, the adrenaline crash leaving me hollow. Reported it to the state police the next day, but they dismissed it as vandals or drunks, no follow-up. Aunt Lydia, when I told her, just sighed. "Told you, Clara. Mountains don't forget. I haven't taken those routes since, sticking to well-lit highways, even if it adds hours. But the memory lingers, a quiet poison. Those eyes, empty yet full of malice, haunt my dreams, turning every shadow on the road into a potential threat. Were they survivors, driven mad by loss? Or something the land itself birthed? A reminder that civilization is thin here, easily peeled away? I don't know. And the uncertainty eats at me, a sorrow for the broken lives hidden in those hills. Sometimes, in the quiet of night, I hear footsteps outside my window, and I wonder if they followed me, waiting for the fog to roll in again. I'd always been the type to laugh off the tall tales spun in dimly lit bars, the kind where the air hangs heavy with cigarette smoke and the faint tang of spilled beer. My name's Travis, and I grew up on the fringes of the Smoky Mountains in eastern Tennessee, where the hills roll like waves frozen in time, cloaked in mist and secrets. I worked construction back then, building cabins for tourists who romanticize the wilderness without knowing its bite. At 35, I'd seen enough of life's rough edges, layoffs, a divorce that left me rattling around an empty trailer, to make me skeptical of anything that sounded too dramatic. But those mountains, they have a way of making you question what you think you know. My buddies and I had a ritual, Friday nights at the old diner in Gatlinburg, swapping stories over greasy burgers and coffee that could strip paint. That particular evening in late September, the talk turned to the ferals, as some called them, descendants of old hill families who'd vanished into the backcountry generations ago, after feuds or famines drove them deep into the woods. They attacked cars for scraps, one guy muttered, eyes darting like he half believed it. Food, gas, whatever. Sport, maybe. I rolled my eyes, called it bullshit meant to spook flatlanders. But as I left around 10 p.m., a storm brewing on the horizon. Those words lingered like an itch I couldn't scratch. The drive home was supposed to be straightforward, but with the main highway clogged from a rock slide earlier that week, I opted for the back lanes, serpentine paths that twisted through the Smokies like veins in an old miner's hand. My Chevy Silverado, a reliable beast with faded blue paint and a toolbox rattling in the bed, handled the curves well enough. Rain started as I climbed out of town, fat drops splattering the windshield, wipers thumping a steady rhythm. Thunder grumbled distant, like the mountains clearing their throats. Cell service dropped almost immediately, the bars on my phone vanishing one by one until it was just a useless brick in the cup holder. Isolation hit hard then, the kind that presses in from all sides, making the cab feel smaller. Headlights pierced the downpour, illuminating sheets of water and the occasional flash of guardrail. Trees loomed on either side, their branches swaying in the wind, leaves whipping like frantic signals. I turned on the radio for company, but static drowned out the stations, popping and hissing like whispers just out of reach. Grandpa used to say the storms here weren't just weather. They stirred things up, brought out what hid in the hollows. I dismissed him as senile, but alone in that truck, with the rain hammering down, doubt crept in slow, like fog seeping through cracks. The road narrowed as I pushed deeper into the parklands, pavement giving way to gravel in spots, mud churning under the tires. Lightning forked across the sky, briefly lighting the ridges in stark white, shadows dancing like they were alive. I gripped the wheel tighter, knuckles paling, the wipers struggling to keep up. No other vehicles out here. Who would be? This was the forgotten way, used by locals who knew better than to linger. Rumors from the bar flickered again. Feral survivors, wild-eyed and ragged, ambushing vehicles for whatever they could scavenge. Descendants of those who'd fled civilization during the Depression, or earlier, during the Cherokee removals that scarred these lands. Living off berries and rabbits, they said, but turning on people when hunger bit deep. Skeptical as I was, the isolation amplified everything. The patter of rain turning ominous. Every gust of wind a potential threat. I shook my head, focused on the road. Home was another 30 miles, a warm bed, and a beer waiting. Just keep going. That's when I saw it. A fallen log blocking the path, thick as my thigh, sprawled across the lane like it had been placed there. Not snapped by wind. Too neat, ends jagged but deliberate. Rain pooled around it, turning the ground to slurry. I cursed under my breath, killed the engine to save gas, and stepped out into the storm. Water soaked me instantly, cold and relentless, running down my collar and into my boots. Thunder rolled closer, vibrating through my chest. I approached the log, boots sinking in mud, figuring I could drag it aside with the winch from the truck. The air smelled of wet earth and pine, sharp and alive. But as I bent down, a low growl stopped me cold, deep, guttural, not quite animal, echoing from the tree to my left. My skin prickled, hair standing on end. I straightened slow, peering into the darkness. Lightning flashed again, and there they were, figures creeping from the rain-soaked trees, forms blurred by the downpour, but distinctly human. Crouched low, moving with a predator's caution, they clutched improvised weapons, sticks sharpened like spears, rocks clutched in fists. For maybe 5, their outlines gaunt and ragged, clothes hanging in tatters like they'd been worn for years without mending. Panic bloomed in my gut, hot and urgent. I backed toward the truck, heart hammering, rain stinging my eyes. "Hey, back off!" I shouted, voice swallowed by the storm. No response, just that growl again, joined by others, harmonizing into something primal and terrifying. I scrambled for the door, slipping in the mud, hand fumbling the handle. Locked it just as one slammed into the side, the impact rocking the Silverado on its suspension. Metal groaned, and the window cracked under the force, spiderwebbing outward. Through the fractured glass, inches from my face, I saw it. Wild hair matted with leaves and dirt, scarred skin stretched tight over sharp bones, eyes gleaming with a primal fury that held no mercy, no recognition, just raw need. It pawed at the door, nails long, broken, scraping the paint with a screech that cut through the thunder. The smell hit then, wafting through the vents. Unwashed bodies, rot, the wild musk of the forest floor mingled with something human and decayed. I twisted the key, engine roaring to life, headlights flaring to illuminate the swarm. They were everywhere now, encircling the truck, emaciated frames, postures hunched like they'd forgotten upright living, faces twisted in desperation or rage. One climbed the hood, boots, bare feet, thumping dents into the metal. Another yanked at the passenger door, rocking the vehicle side to side. I threw it in reverse, tires spinning wildly, mud flying in arcs. The log was still there, but I didn't care, rammed it, with splintering with a crack like gunfire. The truck lurched free, but they didn't stop. One vaulted onto the roof, stomping rhythmically, the cab echoing like a drum. I could feel the dents forming overhead, the frame creaking under the weight. Spun the wheel, fishtailing around, engine screaming as I shifted to drive. Branches whipped the sides as I accelerated, low-hanging limbs scraping like claws eager to hold me back. Their howls pierced the thunder, not screams, but eerie calls coordinating, echoing off the ridges like a pack on the hunt. The road twisted ahead, slick and treacherous, visibility near zero in the deluge. They chased on foot, faster than seemed possible, loping through the underbrush parallel to the lane. Silhouettes flashed in the mirrors, eyes catching the taillights in red glows. One leaped at the bed, grabbing the tailgate, pulling itself up. I swerved, hearing a thud as it tumbled off, but another took its place, banging on the rear window with a spear-like stick. Glass held, but cracks spread. My mind raced. Were these the ferals? Real, flesh and blood remnants of forgotten lives, driven mad by isolation, or just desperate vagrants, pushed to the edge by the same hardships that plague these hills? Lightning illuminated one fully. A woman, maybe hair wild and tangled, clothes pieced from scraps, face etched with scars that spoke of hard survival. No words from them, just those howls, persistent and chilling, urging each other on. I pushed the truck harder, speed climbing despite the curves, tires hydroplaning on standing water. The one on the roof slid but clung, fists pounding inches above my head. Rain poured in through a widening crack in the window, soaking the seats, mixing with my sweat. The pursuit lasted minutes that felt like hours, their stamina unnatural, born of lives spent navigating these wilds. A branch snapped against the side mirror, nearly tearing it off. Finally, the gravel gave way to pavement, the road widening as I descended towards civilization. Streetlights flickered ahead, the outskirts of small town, Pigeon Forge maybe. The attackers sensed the change, their howls fading, figures peeling back into the trees one by one. The last one dropped from the roof with a heavy thump, rolling into the ditch as I sped away. In the rear view, they stood at the forest's edge, watching, rain-slicked and unmoving, before melting into shadow. I pulled in the first mechanic's shop I saw, an all-night garage with buzzing fluorescents and the smell of oil. The truck was a wreck, dents like boot prints on the roof, claw marks gouging the doors, windows fractured, mud caked everywhere. I stumbled inside, rain dripping from my clothes, and told the mechanic, a burly guy with grease-stained hands, what happened. He listened, wiping a rag over his knuckles, eyes narrowing at the damage as he inspected. "You got lucky, mister," he said finally, voice low and matter-of-fact. "Some don't make it out of those lanes. Folks up there, they ain't right. Been that way since the old days. Mountains take care of their own, but they don't like intruders. No questions, no call to the cops, just that knowing look like he'd heard it before." He patched what he could, sent me on with a warning to stay on main roads. That was 3 years ago, but the encounter clings like burrs on a sock, a quiet terror that surfaces in the dead of night. I quit construction, moved to Knoxville for a desk job, but the Smokies call sometimes, their ridges visible on clear days. Every storm brings it back, the growl, the howls, the eyes burning with fury. Were they protecting territory or just surviving in a world that forgot them? I don't know, and the confusion twists deeper with time, a sorrow for lives warped by these ancient hills. Now, when thunder rolls, I lock the doors, listen for echoes in the wind, wondering if they're still out there, waiting for the next soul to wander into their domain under the cover of night. The mountains keep their secrets, and sometimes I fear they've marked me as one of their own. I've never been one to spook easily. Growing up in the suburbs of Louisville, where the scariest thing was rush hour traffic or a bad thunderstorm knocking out power for a few hours. My name's Jordan, and at 29, I was chasing a bit of solitude after a messy breakup. Nothing dramatic, just the slow fade of two people realizing they didn't fit anymore. A friend recommended a cabin rental deep in Kentucky's Appalachian backcountry, near Daniel Boone National Forest, promising peace, hiking trails, and no-cell service to tempt me into scrolling X's social media. I booked it on a whim, packed my SUV with enough supplies for a week, and hit the road one crisp October evening. The leaves were turning, carpeting the highways in reds and golds, but as I veered off the interstate onto narrower state routes, the beauty shifted to something more isolating. Trees crowded in, their branches skeletal against the fading light, and the air through the cracked window carried that sharp autumn bite. Damp earth, decaying foliage, a hint of wood smoke from distant chimneys. I cranked the heater, popped in an old podcast about local folklore to pass the time. It was the kind of stuff that amused me. Tales of moonshiners, lost hikers, and whispers of feral people lurking in the hills. Online forums I'd skimmed while planning the trip were full of them. Anonymous posts about folks gone wild from poverty, addiction, or just the crushing weight of mountain life, surviving like animals in forgotten hollows they attack at night. One user claimed, stealing from campsites or worse. I chuckled, dismissed it as urban legends amplified by the internet. After all, I was just driving to a cozy cabin with a hot tub and Wi-Fi hotspots. What could go wrong? The sun dipped fully as I navigated the twisting backroads, headlights sweeping over potholed asphalt that hadn't seen fresh pavement in years. The GPS on my phone glitched around 9 p.m., signal dropping, the blue dot frozen on a map that no longer updated. Recalculating. It chirped uselessly before going silent. I pulled over briefly, engine idling, to check the paper map I'd printed as backup. The cabin was another 20 miles or so, down roads with names like Hollow Creek Lane and Bear Branch Road. Poetic, but unhelpful in the dark. No bars on the phone, of course. These mountains swallowed technology like they did everything else. I felt a twinge of unease then, subtle at first, like the first chill of fever. The podcast had moved on to a story about a driver encountering wild men near Red River Gorge, their eyes glowing in headlights, hands clawing at car doors. I switched it off, opting for silence, broken only by the crunch of leaves under tires as I pressed on. The air grew cooler, fog wisps curling up from the ditches, and the forest pressed closer, a wall of black on either side. No houses now, no lights, just me, the SUV, and the endless ribbon of road unspooling into nothing. I told myself it was peaceful, the isolation I'd craved, but my hands gripped the wheel a little tighter, knuckles paling in the dashboard glow. Time blurred in the monotony, the clock ticking past 10 p.m. The leaves crunched louder under the tires, a steady rhythm that almost lulled me. But then, ahead in the beam of my highlights, a shape shuffled into view, slow, deliberate, blocking the center of the road. At first, I thought it was a deer, common enough out here, frozen in the glare. But as I eased off the gas, drawing closer, details sharpened, upright, human-sized, but ragged, like something dragged from the underbrush. It looked like a man, broad-shouldered but hunched, posture all wrong, shoulders sloping forward, head low as if sniffing the air. Matted beard tangled down his chest, hair wild and unkempt, clothes a patchwork of filth-stiffened rags. He didn't move as I approached, just stood there, swaying slightly, eyes catching the light in a dull gleam. My stomach nodded. A homeless guy? Lost hiker? I honked once, sharp and insistent, expecting him to jolt and scramble aside. But he didn't flinch, just turned his head slowly, that gleam sharpening into a stare that held no surprise, no fear. Just emptiness. Hunger, maybe. I honked again, longer this time, but instead of retreating, others emerged from the ditches on both sides, shadowy forms materializing from the fog like they'd been waiting all along. There were 4 at first, then more, 6, 7, slipping from the treeline with synchronized movements, like hunters cornering prey. Gaunt faces, emaciated bodies under tattered layers, limbs moving with a loping grace that spoke of lives spent navigating rough terrain. Their eyes glowed in the headlights, reflective, feral, locking onto the SUV with calculated intent. Not random wanderers. This felt coordinated, territorial. The online stories flooded back unbidden. People turned wild by isolation, poverty grinding them down until humanity frayed. I could see it now. The scars on exposed skin, nails long and dirt-caked, beards and hair matted with burrs and leaves. One approached the driver's side, slow but purposeful, hand outstretched. It pawed at the door, fingers leaving smears on the glass, grimy trails that obscured my view. Up close, the smell seeped through the vents. Unwashed sweat, rot, the wild tang of forest decay. My heart slammed against my ribs, breath coming shallow. "Get back," I yelled, voice muffled inside the cab, but only pressed closer, face inches from the window, breath fogging the pain in ragged bursts. Eyes met mine, void of any spark, just primal need. Panic rose like bile. I revved the engine in warning, the SUV growling loud, but they didn't scatter. Instead, they swarmed closer, fists pounding the hood with dull thuds that buckled the metal slightly. The vehicle rocked under the assault, doors rattling as more hands slapped and scratched. One climbed the bumper, perching like a gargoyle, hammering the windshield with a rock clutched in its fist. Cracks bloomed across the glass, spiderwebbing outward. Their grunts filtered in low, guttural, not words but signals, coordinating like a pack. No screams, no pleas, just that eerie efficiency, as if this was routine, a hunt they'd perfected over years in the shadows. The one at my door yanked the handle, the lock holding but straining. Nails raked down the paint with a screech that set my teeth on edge. I shifted into drive, foot slamming the gas, but the tires spun briefly on the leaf-strewn road before catching. The SUV lurched forward, barreling toward the figure still blocking the path. It didn't move fast enough, a sickening thump as the bumper clipped it, body rolling off to the side with a pained grunt that echoed human but broken. In the rearview mirror, they gave chase, silhouettes loping after me with eerie stamina, faster than ragged humans should be. The road climbed steeply ahead, twisting up a ridge, engines straining against the grade. Fog thickened, headlights bouncing back in a hazy glow, but I pushed harder, speed climbing despite the curves. One caught up briefly, leaping at the trunk, nails scraping metal as it tried to hold on, the sound like fingers on a chalkboard. The SUV fishtailed on a wet patch, nearly sliding into the ditch, but I corrected, dislodging the pursuer with a thud. Their forms faded in the mirrors, but I could hear them, rustles in the underbrush paralleling the road, occasional grunts piercing the engine's roar. My mind raced. Were these the feral ones from the forums? Survivors of collapsed economies, abandoned mines, families left to rot when the world moved on? Or something older, legends made flesh by the mountains' unforgiving embrace? The isolation amplified everything. The crunch of gravel, the whip of branches against the sides, the pounding of my heart like it might burst. The climb peaked, the road descending toward what I hoped was civilization. Bursting onto a main highway, wider, lit sporadically by distant farm lights, the pursuit ended abruptly. No more shadows in the mirrors, no rustles. Just the hum of tires on smoother asphalt. Rain starting to patter as if the sky wept in relief. My hand shook on the wheel, breaths coming in gasps. The SUV was marked. It dented like it had been pummeled, paint gouged deep, windshield a maze of cracks that blurred the view. I drove on autopilot for miles, heart racing long after the danger passed, until I reached the cabin turnoff. The rental owner, an older woman named May, with a face lined like the ridges outside, met me at the door with a lantern. She eyed the damage without a word at first, then invited me in for coffee. Over steaming mugs, I spilled the story, words tumbling out. She listened, nodding slowly, no shock in her eyes. "Happens more in you'd think," she confided, voice low like sharing a secret. "Folks up here get left behind. Mines close, towns dry up. Some turn wild, garden their patches of woods. Advise against night drives, but people don't listen." She patched the windshield with tape, sent me to bed with a warning to bolt the doors. That was 2 years ago, but the quiet dread follows me like a shadow I can't shake. I left the cabin early, drove home in daylight, but the mountain's secrets linger. Back in Louisville, amid the noise of city life, I avoid backroads, stick to interstates even for short trips. Every autumn, when leaves crunch underfoot, it comes back, the glitch of the GPS, the glowing eyes, the thump under the tires. Were they protecting something, or just lashing out at intruders in their forsaken world? Poverty and isolation can break anyone, turn neighbors into strangers, humans into something feral. I don't know, and the confusion breeds sorrow for them, for the hills that cradle such despair. Sometimes in the dead of night, I swear I hear nails scraping at the window, eyes watching from the dark. The Appalachians hold their guards viciously, and once you've glimpsed them, a simple drive becomes a nightmare you can't outrun. I'd always prided myself on being the practical sort, the guy who planned routes meticulously and scoffed at superstitions that clung to these old Virginia hills like morning mist. My name's Marcus, and back then, I was 37, a sales rep for a pharmaceutical company, crisscrossing the mid-Atlantic states in my reliable Subaru Outback. The job kept me on the road more than at home, but I didn't mind. The solitude suited me, gave me time to listen to podcasts and unwind from the fluorescent-lit offices and endless meetings. That particular trip in mid-May, I'd wrapped up a conference in Roanoke earlier than expected, around 6 p.m., and decided to push through to my next stop in Charlottesville rather than crash in a motel. Traffic on I-81 was a nightmare, backed up for miles from construction, so I opted for the scenic detour through the Blue Ridge Mountains. The Blue Ridge Parkway after dusk? Sure, why not? It was shorter on paper, and I'd driven parts of it in daylight, admiring the views of rolling ridges blanketed in green. But night changes everything out there. The darkness envelopes like a shroud, turning familiar landscapes into something alien and unforgiving. I figured I'd beat the rush, grab a late dinner on the other side. What I didn't count on was how the mountains seemed to breathe at night, alive with whispers I couldn't quite place. As I turned off the interstate onto the parkway, the sun had already slipped below the horizon, leaving a faint purple glow that faded quickly. Headlights sliced through the gathering dark, illuminating twists of asphalt hugged by dense forest. Trees towered on either side, their leaves rustling in a light breeze that carried the scent of pine and damp soil. No streetlights here, just the occasional pull-off overlook, empty and shadowed. My phone's GPS showed spotty service, but the route was straightforward. Follow the parkway north for about 50 miles, then drop down into the valley. To pass the time, I queued up a podcast on local legends, something I'd downloaded on a whim, tales of Appalachian folklore narrated in a gravelly voice that fit the setting. The host droned on about moonshiners and ghost towns, but then shifted to stories of feral clans, outcasts who'd gone off-grid after the economic crashes of the 70s and 80s, families shunned by society, or maybe escaped from it, living in hidden camps, ambushing travelers for supplies, or just out of spite. They moved silent as shadows, the narrator intoned, eyes wild from years without human contact. I chuckled to myself, shaking my head. Sounded like campfire fodder, the kind of yarn locals spun to keep tourists on the main roads. Still, as the podcast played, the isolation crept in, the absence of other cars, the way the trees seemed to lean closer, branches scraping the sky like fingers. I cracked the window for fresh air, but it only amplified the quiet. Crickets chirping in rhythm, distant owls hooting low and mournful. The starless sky pressed down, clouds gathering thick and ominous, blotting out any moonlight. I'd been driving about 20 minutes when the unease started to build, subtle at first, like the podcast words lingering a bit too long in my mind. No big deal, I told myself, just the dark playing tricks. But the road felt narrower, the curves sharper, forcing me to slow to 30. Fog began to roll in from the valleys below, wisps curling across the pavement like smoke from unseen fires. My high beams caught them, turning the world hazy and disorienting. I fiddled with the radio to switch off the podcast, enough of that nonsense, but static hissed back, no signal this high up. The Subaru hummed steadily, tires whispering over the asphalt, but every now and then a leaf or twig crunched under them, sharp and unexpected. I glanced at the dashboard clock, 8:45 p.m. Home felt a world away, and for the first time, I regretted not taking the crowded interstate. The mountains have a way of making you feel small, insignificant, like you're intruding on something ancient and private. Grandpa, who'd grown up in these parts before moving north, used to say the Blue Ridge didn't suffer fools lightly. Respect the quiet, he'd warn, but I'd always dismissed it as old man ramblings. Then came the jolt, a sharp pop onto the right front tire, the car lurching as if it had hit a pothole. The steering wheel vibrated, and I felt the telltale drag of a flat. Damn it, I muttered, easing onto the shoulder, a narrow gravel strip bordered by a steep drop-off on one side and thick woods on the other. No guardrail here, just a void swallowing the fog. I killed the engine, headlights staying on to light the way, and stepped out into the chill. The air was heavier now, laced with that earthy dampness that precedes rain. Kneeling by the tire, I saw the culprit, a jagged shard of metal, maybe from an old fence or debris, embedded deep in the tread. Flat as a pancake, I popped the trunk for the spare and jack, tools clanking in the silence. That's when the rustling started, faint at first, like wind through leaves, but closer, deliberate. Footsteps? I froze, flashlight app on my phone sweeping the tree line. Nothing but shadows dancing in the beam. Probably a deer or raccoon, I reasoned, but my pulse quickened anyway. The podcast's words echoed unbidden. Feral clans, ambushing travelers. I shook it off, focused on loosening the lug nuts, the wrench cold in my hands. The rustling grew louder, branching out, multiple sources now, encircling from the woods. I straightened, heart thumping, straining to listen over the crickets. Branches snapped under weight, not light animal steps, but heavier, purposeful. Shadows detached from the trees then, materializing in the headlights' glow. Human figures, but feral in demeanor, clad in tattered clothes that hung like rags from gaunt frames. Wild gazes fixed on me, hair matted and unkempt, faces smeared with dirt and scars from hard living. 3 at first, then more, 5, 6, emerging silent as ghosts. No words, no shouts, just that determined advance, eyes reflecting the light in dull gleams. My stomach dropped. These weren't hikers or locals. Their postures were wrong, hunched, predatory, like they'd adapted to crawling through underbrush. Outcasts, maybe living off-grid as the podcast described, but real, flesh and blood, staring at me with a hunger that chilled deeper than the night air. One lunged without warning, faster than I expected, grabbing my arm through the open driver's door where I'd left it ajar. Its grip was iron, fingers like vice clamps, nails digging into my skin, drawing pinpricks of blood. The pain snapped me alert. I could smell it now, the rank odor of unwashed body and forest rot, breath hot and fetid against my face as it tried to pull me out. No expression on its face, just blank determination, teeth gritted in a silent snarl. I kicked hard, boot connecting with its knee, a grunt escaping its lips, the first sound low and animal. It loosened just enough for me to yank free, slamming the door shut, lock clicking as more hands slapped the windows. I fumbled the keys, engine roaring to life amid their onslaught. Rocks pelted the hood, thumping like hail, one cracking the side mirror. Branches, thick ones, wielded like clubs, battered the roof, dents popping under the force. The car rocked, glass vibrating, their faces pressed close. Pale skin stretched over bones, eyes void of any plea or rage, just that unrelenting focus. I'd always felt a pull toward the mountains, like they were woven into my blood from generations of folks who'd carved out lives in these North Carolina valleys. My name's Lena, and growing up in Asheville, I'd heard the whispers, stories passed down at family gatherings about the land's unforgiving nature, how it could break a person if they strayed too far from the lights of town. But at 34, with a steady job as a nurse in the city hospital, I figured I was beyond all that. The mountains are just a backdrop for hikes and weekends away, not something to fear. That foggy evening in late August, though, changed everything. I'd spent the day at a family reunion up near Boone, the kind where aunts pinched your cheeks and uncles droned on about the good old days. Laughter echoed under the pavilion, plates piled with barbecue and coleslaw, kids chasing fireflies as dusk settled. But as the sun dipped, a chill crept in, and the fog started rolling down from the peaks like a slow-moving river. I said my goodbyes around 8 p.m., hugging cousins and promising to visit soon, then climbed into my old Toyota Camry, the one with the faded bumper sticker from a long-ago road trip. The drive home was supposed to be simple. Head south through the valleys, skirting the Blue Ridge Parkway for quieter backroads. I was lost in thought, replaying conversations about lost jobs and aging parents. The radio tuned low to some folk station playing banjo tunes that blended with the hum of the engine. The mist thickened gradually, at first just veils drifting across the windshield, but soon it swallowed the road ahead, reducing visibility to mere yards. My headlights bounced back at me, creating a glowing wall that made the world feel smaller, more confined. Trees loomed as vague shapes on either side, their branches like arms reaching out from the haze. I'd read articles online, curiosity pieces in local papers, about feral encounters in these parts. Survivors of old family feuds, they said, clans who'd retreated into the wilderness after blood was spilled generations ago, living savage and unseen. Cut off from society, they turned wild, scavenging and defending their territory with a primal ferocity. I dismissed it as sensationalism, the kind of thing that sold ads on websites, but driving alone that night, with the fog pressing in, those stories niggled at the edges of my mind. What if there was a kernel of truth? Poverty and isolation could warp anyone. After all, I'd seen it in patients at the hospital. Folks from remote hollows, eyes haunted by hardships most couldn't imagine. I shook off the thought, focused on the white line fading in and out of view. The air through the vents carried a damp chill, smelling of wet leaves and soil, and I cracked the sunroof a sliver for fresh air, regretting it almost immediately as mist beat it on the dashboard. The valleys deepened as I drove, the road dipping and rising like a gentle wave, but the fog made every curve feel treacherous. No other cars passed. It was just me, the Camry's tires whispering over damp asphalt, occasional gravel pinging the undercarriage. Cell service had dropped miles back, the bars on my phone vanishing one by one until it was useless. Isolation wrapped around me like the mist itself, a quiet weight that settled in my chest. I turned up the radio for company, but static crept in, distorting the music into fragmented echoes. Grandpa used to talk about these roads, warning us kids not to wander after dark. "The mountains have eyes," he'd say, his voice low over cups of black coffee. "And they don't always belong to animals." I'd laugh then, but now, with the fog so thick I could barely see the hood, his words echoed uncomfortably. I slowed to 25, hands tight on the wheel, peering ahead as if willpower could part the haze. Lightning bugs flickered sporadically in the ditches, tiny lights winking out like false hopes. The clock glowed 9:15 p.m. Home felt farther away than ever. That's when the barricade appeared. A makeshift wall of branches and logs sprawled across the lane, materializing from the fog like it had grown there. Not a natural fall, too deliberate, piled with intent. My foot hit the brake, the Camry skidding slightly on the slick surface before stopping short. Heart picking up, I stared at it, thick limbs tangled with vines, blocking both lanes. A fallen tree from the wind? But the air was still, no storm raging. I hesitated, engine idling, debating whether to get out and clear it. The fog muffled everything, turning the world soft and indistinct. Then, movement, subtle at first, shapes shifting in the haze beyond the headlights. Figures materialized, stepping from the tree lean with deliberate slowness, encircling the car. Gaunt silhouettes, clothed in scraps of fabric that hung like molted skins, their postures animalistic. Hunched low, knees bent as if ready to spring, yet coordinated like a pack moving as one. 4, then 5, their faces emerging pale and drawn, eyes catching the light in dull gleams. Beards matted with dirt, hair wild and tangled, skin etched with the grime of untold seasons. No words from them, just that silent advance, breaths visible in the chill mist. Panic flickered alive in my gut. I locked the doors, clicks echoing too loud in the cab, and revved the engine as a warning. But one step forward, rock clutched in a fist and smashed it against the windshield with a crack that shattered the quiet. Glass splintered instantly, a starburst blooming right in my line of sight. I yelped, instinct taking over, and accelerated, plowing into the barricade. Wood splintered with a series of pops, branches scraping the undercarriage like claws fighting to hold on. The Camry bucked over the debris, tires spinning for traction on the other side. But they didn't retreat. They pursued, leaping onto the vehicle with startling agility. The roof creaked under sudden weight, metal groaning as one, or two, landed above. Hands, filthy, nails jagged, reached through the sunroof gap I'd foolishly left open, clawing at my shoulder. Pain lanced hot as nails tore through my blouse and into skin, blood trickling warm down my arm. I screamed, swatting wildly, the metallic tang of blood mixing with the damp fog seeping in. The car surged forward, but their persistence was terrifying. Howls erupting now, a chilling chorus that pierced the valley, echoing off unseen ridges. Not human cries, but primal, guttural calls that raised every hair on my body. I swerved wildly, the road twisting blindly in the mist, trying to dislodge them. The one on the roof slid but held, stomping dents that thumped like heartbeats overhead. Another clung to the passenger door, face pressed to the glass, breath fogging it in ragged bursts, eyes locked on mine with quiet malice. Not rage, but a calculated hunger, like I was prey that had wandered into their domain. Blood soaked my sleeve, stinging with each movement, but adrenaline dulled it. The fog swirled thicker, headlights illuminating flashes of pursuit, silhouettes loping alongside, faster than seemed possible on rough terrain. Branches whipped the sides as I veered close to the edge, gravel crunching under tires. Their howls harmonized, a haunting melody that seemed to call more from the shadows. My mind reeled. Were these the survivors from those articles? Descendants of feuding families, left to fester in the wilderness, their humanity eroded by years of solitude and scarcity? Or just desperate souls the mountains had claimed, turning them into guardians of the wild? The valley road climbed slightly, then dipped, the fog clinging like a living thing reluctant to let go. I pushed the Camry harder, engine whining in protest, the damaged windshield distorting everything into fractured nightmares. A hand groped through the sunroof again, fingers brushing my hair. I ducked, slamming the gas, and felt the weight shift, a heavy thud as a body tumbled off. But the howls didn't fade. They echoed through the haze, a relentless chorus that followed like ghosts. Pain throbbed my shoulder, blood dripping onto the seat, sticky and warm. The smell invaded the cab. Unwashed bodies, earth, something feral and ancient. I glimpsed more in the rear view, shapes darting between trees, keeping pace with eerie endurance. The road narrowed, forcing me to slow on a curve, and one leaped at the trunk, nails scraping metal with a screech that vibrated through the frame. I zigzagged, hearing another fall away, but the pursuit felt endless, the fog trapping me in a perpetual chase. Minutes stretched like hours, my breath coming in gasps, hands slick on the wheel with sweat and blood. The howls peaked, a symphony of primal despair that chilled deeper than the mist. Then, gradually, the fog began to lift, thinning as I descended toward lower ground, patches of clear sky peeking through. Streetlights flickered ahead, the glow of a roadside diner cutting the gloom like a beacon. The attackers sensed it, their efforts faltering. One last howl trailed off, mournful and distant, as they vanished into the tree lane. I burst into the parking lot, gravel crunching, and killed the engine with shaking hands. The Camry was scarred, windshield shattered, roof pocked with dents, paint raked in long gouges, blood smeared on the interior. I stumbled inside the diner, a bell jingling cheerily above the door. The warmth and smell of coffee, a stark contrast to the cold outside. Patrons, truckers and locals, turned, eyes widening at my disheveled state, the bloody shoulder. I collapsed into a booth, words tumbling out. The barricade, the figures, the attack. They listened, faces grave, sharing knowing glances over mugs. An older man in a flannel shirt leaned in, voice low. They claimed the mountains for their own. He whispered, no judgment, just fact. Old feuds, hard times, folks get lost up there, turn wild. You're lucky to make it out. No one laughed, no skepticism, just nods and offers of bandages from the waitress. The sheriff came later, took notes, but his questions felt routine, like he'd heard it before. We'll look into it, he said, but his eyes said otherwise. The mountains were vast, secrets buried deep. I drove home that night, bandaged and numb, the fog of memory clinging to my clothes. That was a year ago, but the lingering dread never lifts, a quiet malice shadowing my days. I avoid those valleys now, stick to interstates even if it adds hours, but the realism of that attack haunts me. The coordinated steps, the silent encirclement, the howls that weren't quite human. Were they protecting ancient grudges? Or had the wilderness stripped them bare, leaving only instinct? Poverty and feuds can birth such things, twisting lives into something unrelenting. I don't know, and the confusion breeds sorrow. For them, echoes of forgotten families, and for me, forever scanning the headlight's edge. Sometimes, in foggy evenings, I hear those howls in the wind, a chilling reminder that the mountains guard their own, and once touched by their wild, you never truly escape. I never minded the rain much, growing up in the rolling hills of central Pennsylvania, where storms rolled in like old friends, washing the world clean before moving on. My name's Riley, and at 26, I was grinding through life as a line cook at a roadside diner in Altoona, flipping burgers and scrubbing grills until my hands ached. The pay was lousy, but it kept the lights on in my tiny apartment, and the late shifts meant I had the highways to myself on the way home. That night in early spring, the rain came down in sheets, turning the asphalt into a slick mirror that reflected my headlights back at me. Thunder rumbled low and distant, like the mountains were grumbling in their sleep. I'd clocked out around midnight, my uniform smelling of grease and onions, and climbed in my beat-up Honda Accord, the one with a leaky sunroof and a dashboard that rattled on bumps. Home was about 40 minutes north, through the Appalachian stretch where the roads curved like snakes around steep ridges and deep valleys. Cell service was spotty at best, but I didn't mind. It gave me time to unwind, let the day's chaos fade into the rhythm of the wipers slapping back and forth. The highway, Route 22, mostly, was empty that night. No semis barreling through or locals heading to third shift. Water sheeted across the pavement, pooling in the ruts, and I had to ease off the gas to keep from hydroplaning. Fog lights on, but they barely cut through the downpour, turning the world into a blurry tunnel of gray. Trees lined the shoulders, their branches swaying heavy with rain, leaves dripping like they were weeping. I'd heard the tales, of course. Everyone in these parts has. Over beers at the diner after close, co-workers would spin yarns about feral attackers, reclusive groups who'd retreated into the wild after the steel mills closed decades ago, or families hit hard by the opioid wave that swept through the hollows they turned wild up there. One old-timer said once, eyes narrowed over his coffee. Harsh terrain twists makes them forget they're human. They'll jump a car for gas or food, or just cause you're in their way. I nod, half listening, figuring it for exaggeration, the kind of story that grows legs in small towns where boredom breeds imagination. Poverty was real enough. I'd seen in the faces of folks who came into the diner, hollow-eyed and desperate. But feral people? Sounded like something from a bad movie. Still, driving alone that night, with the rain hammering the roof and thunder echoing off the ridges, those tales wormed their way in, a quiet unease settling like the mist rising from the warm asphalt. The curve started about 15 minutes out, the road climbing gently before dipping into a valley flanked by sheer rock faces on one side and dense forest on the other. Guardrails rusted and bent from past accidents lined the edges, but in spots, they were missing, swallowed by erosion or neglect. My mind wandered as I navigated them, thinking about the ex who'd left last year, chasing dreams in Philly, or the stack of bills waiting on my kitchen table. The radio fizzled with static, no clear station this far out, so I switched it off, leaving only the patter of rain and the swish of tires. Lightning flashed occasional, illuminating the ridges in stark white, shadows leaping like they were alive. The air through the vents carried that petrichor scent, fresh and earthy, but undercut with something metallic, like wet iron. I cracked the window a hair, despite the spray, to shake off the drowsiness creeping in. No coffee left in my thermos, just the road and me. Grandpa used to drive these routes as a trucker, warning me about the unseen wild. Folks who'd slipped through society's cracks, living in abandoned cabins or caves emerging only when hunger drove them. "Respect the rain," he'd say. "It hides things." I'd laugh it off as a kid, but now, with visibility down to feet, his words echoed a bit too loud in the quiet cab. Suddenly, a hand slapped the passenger window, hard, streaking mud across the glass in a dirty arc. I jerked, heart slamming into my throat, the car swerving slightly before I corrected. Glancing over, I saw it. A figure running alongside, soaked to the bone, keeping pace with the Accord at 30 miles an hour. Wild eyes stared back through the rain-streaked pane, pleading or threatening. I couldn't tell. Hair plastered flat, face gaunt and shadowed under a hood of rags. Human, definitely, but wild like something dragged from the underbrush. Thunder crashed overhead, drowning my gasp. "What the hell?" I muttered, foot hovering over the brake. A lost soul? Hitchhiker in distress? But something felt off, the way it moved, loping with unnatural stamina, hand pawing at the door now, nails scratching faintly. More appeared then, emerging from behind the guardrails like they'd been crouched there waiting. 2, 3, 5 now, blocking the lane ahead, their forms blurred by the downpour, but unmistakably purposeful. Gaunt figures in tattered clothes, postures low and aggressive, eyes reflecting my headlights in dull gleams. I braked hard, tires locking on the wet pavement, the car skidding sideways with a hydroplane whine. One vaulted onto the hood before I could stop fully, boots or bare feet, thumping heavy, fists hammering the windshield. The glass vibrated under the blows, wipers smearing what looked like blood or mud from its hands, streaking red-brown across my view. Panic exploded in my chest, hot, electric. I threw the car into reverse, engine revving high, but another was behind me now, the bump sickening as the rear bumper clipped it, a grunt audible even over the storm. The figure tumbled, but others swarmed, hands slapping the sides, rocking the Accord like they meant to flip it. Doors buckled under the pressure, metal groaning as they yanked handles, locks holding but straining. Their faces pressed close, human but etched with desperation, skin pale and scarred, mouths open in silent roars amid the thunder. No words, no demands, just that raw, animalistic push, eyes holding a quiet frenzy that spoke of lives ground down by isolation. The smell seeped in, unwashed, earthy like wet dog mixed with decay. Through the cracked window, I'd forgotten to roll up. I fumbled the gear shift, heart pounding so hard it blurred my vision, and found an opening to the right, a narrow shoulder barely wide enough. Gunned it, tires spinning wildly on the slick highway, hydroplaning for a terrifying second before catching. The one on the hood slid but clung, fist cracking the glass further, a web of fractures spreading like frost. Rain poured in through a widening gap, soaking my lap, mixing with the sweat of fear. They chased as I accelerated, loping alongside with eerie speed, one grabbing the mirror and twisting it with a screech. Another leaped at the trunk, the car dipping under weight, nails raking the paint in long gouges. Thunder rolled again, lightning flashing to illuminate the scene. 6, maybe 7 now, their rag-sodden, movements synchronized like a pack hunting. Silent roars turned to grunts, low and guttural, coordinating without speech. My mind reeled. Were these the feral ones from the tales? Recluses twisted by the harsh terrain, families abandoned when industries fled, surviving on scraps and turning on travelers? Poverty bred desperation. I knew. Seen it in the diner, folks scraping by. But this was something deeper, the mountains' isolation forging them into shadows of humanity. The highway curved sharply ahead, a downhill sweep into the valley where visibility worsened, water rushing across the lanes like mini rivers. I pushed the Accord harder, speed climbing to 50 despite the risk, the engine whining in protest. The hanger-on tumbled off with a thud, rolling into the ditch, but others kept pace briefly, silhouettes flashing in the rear view. One reached through the passenger window, glass shattered now from a rock they'd hurled, fingers brushing my arm, nails digging shallow, furrows that burned. Blood welled, warm and sticky, dripping onto the seat. I swerved, hearing another body hit the pavement, but the pursuit felt relentless, their forms melting in and out of the rain like ghosts. The storm intensified, wind buffeting the car, branches from overhanging trees whipping the roof. My breaths came ragged, panic narrowing my world to the wheel and the blurred road ahead. What drove them? Hunger? Territory? Or just the madness of lives forgotten? The Appalachians breeding a wildness that consumed, miles blurred in the chaos, the downhill grade helping me pull away. Glancing back, I saw them standing in the rain, clustered on the highway, watching with those wild eyes, unmoving as I receded. Lightning silhouetted them one last time, then they faded into the storm. I didn't stop until a rest stop loomed, neon signs buzzing through the downpour. Pulled and shaking, killed the engine, and sat there for minutes, rain drumming on the roof, blood staining my shirt. The Accord was wrecked, dented like it had been pounded with hammers, windows shattered or cracked, paint scored deep, bumper crumpled from the impact. I stumbled into the building, the fluorescent lights harsh after the dark. The clerk, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes, looked up from her magazine, brow furrowing at my state. I spilled the story in bursts. The hand, the swarm, the escape. She listened, pouring me coffee with steady hands, then nodded at the damage visible through the window. "Happens more than you'd think up here," she said, voice flat with resignation. "Folks get lost in these mountains, jobs gone, families broken, turn wild, claim the roads as their own. Sheriff's heard it before, but what can they do? Hills are too big. No shock, no call to action, just that knowing acceptance like it was part of the weather." I patched myself up in the bathroom, scratches shallow but stinging, bruises blooming where I'd banged against the door, and drove home slow, the storm easing into a drizzle. Reported it to the local cops the next day, but they took notes with skeptical eyes, chalking it to transient activity or maybe a prank gone wrong. No follow-up, no search parties. The mountains were vast, swallowing such incidents like they did everything else. I quit the late shift soon after, found work closer to town, but the encounter's disturbing realism clings to me like damp clothes after rain. Those faces, human yet twisted by desperation, haunt the edges of my sleep, eyes pleading or threatening in dreams where the highway stretches endless. The Appalachians breed isolation that warps people, turning routine drives into harrowing fights for survival against the unseen wild. Were they once like me, ground down until something snapped? Or guardians of forgotten places, lashing out at intruders? I don't know, and the confusion festers, a quiet sorrow for lives unraveled in those ridges. Now, when rain slicks the roads, I lock the doors, glance at the windows, wondering if hands wait in the dark, ready to streak mud and pull me into the storm. The mountains remember, and sometimes I fear they've marked me too.